Good evening. I'm Larry Ziffer. I want to tell you a story, a true story, a story that illustrates why we are here tonight. It took place right here in Baltimore. A 14-year-old boy from a fine family was enjoying himself at Simchas Torah Hakafos. In the shul social hall, he noticed a table on the side that had a number of bottles of scotch and a bunch of plastic cups. He decided that this would be the perfect opportunity to impress his friends. So he gathered some of them, walked over to the table, and took a large shot. The first shot tasted pretty awful, but he got the reaction that he was seeking. So he took another, and then another. All this happened while dozens of adults were also going back and forth to and from the table. As his friends laughed and egged him on, he took at least 6 or 7 shots of scotch until he was feeling really sick. I think we could say wasted. At this point, he felt so sick that he decided to go home. He found his 11-year-old brother and said, "Let's go." But that was easier said than done. He couldn't walk straight, kept getting confused about where he was, and gave his younger brother a hard time as they walked. The younger brother, who was suddenly thrust into an unexpected position of responsibility, started crying. He half led, half supported his older brother in an effort to be helpful. But what if he couldn't get his brother home? What if his brother died on the way? What would their parents say or do? Now I know what you're thinking. I know. Boys will be boys. This is how children learn. We've all been there. Kids get drunk and then sleep it off. But let me ask you some questions. What if this 14-year-old boy had walked out of the building and into the street and was hit by a car? Would we say boys will be boys? What if this 14-year-old had passed out somewhere in the building and couldn't be found? What if his younger brother hadn't been there to guide him home? Why didn't any of those adults try to stop this young boy from taking shot after shot of scotch? And finally, what if this 14-year-old was one of those people with a genetic predisposition for addiction, and this was just the start of a lifetime struggle that could lead to binge drinking, marijuana, or even opioids? Now I know what you're thinking. I know. One bad experience on Simchas Torah is not necessarily a direct link to alcoholism and addiction. But I want you to know that since we began organizing Chayeinu, I have spoken with a number of heartbroken parents, siblings, and even with recovering addicts. And they all tell stories that begin just like this one. It might have been a Purim Mesiba or a Bar Mitzvah. It might have been a wedding or a Shalom Zachor. It might have been a dare to raid the parents' liquor cabinet or bathroom medicine cabinet. It's a little like playing Russian roulette, don't you think? So who's responsible in this story? Is it the shul for having an unsupervised liquor table? Is it the rabbi for not insisting on such supervision? Is it the parents for not being there to supervise their adolescent? Or was it all of the adults who were standing around and didn't stop an obviously tipsy 14-year-old boy from going to the table for yet another shot of scotch? We are here tonight because I think the correct answer is that we are all responsible. We as a community need to say no more needless deaths of young people. We need to be aware and informed about how to use alcohol responsibly, how to give our children appropriate guidance, how to be mature role models, how to seek help when necessary, and how to create an atmosphere of collective responsibility. Chayeinu was formed to work towards these goals. A number of months ago, we welcomed the leadership of Amudim from New York to help us broach the issue with Rabbanim and school leaders. We then met again with Rabbanim and Dr. Michael Kiedorf, a psychologist who works at Johns Hopkins, to explore aspects of addiction and how it affects families. We had 2 meetings with Dr. Kiedorf and Dr. Simcha Varon, a child psychiatrist, together with the menahalim and the counselors of our local yeshivas and day schools. We will be working closely with Rabbi Yisrael Slansky and Relief Resources to help people get appropriate referrals if they need counseling, rehabilitation, or just more information. We will be working with Jewish Community Services, with Lev Shlomo and JTAP, with Sholem Tikva and other local organizations that provide services to help families or individuals who are trying to deal with addictions. And we will be working with our local day schools and yeshivos to assist them with resources so that wellness and resilience can be built into the curriculum. Tonight is the first of a series of meetings to increase awareness and provide education about addictions. Future sessions will feature parents and teens who are in recovery, a panel of local therapists, a specialist on addiction to video games like Fortnite, and a frank discussion about the deeper problems with e-cigarettes like Juuls. I want to stop for a moment and express our deepest appreciation to Aaron and Ilana Blackman, who provided us with a generous lead gift to get Chayeinu started. Their gift is in memory of their friend, David Gutman. While this is decidedly not a fundraising event, we welcome contributions from anyone who wants to help us create a positive and constructive community response to the scourge of addictions. I also want to express special thanks to Rabbi Yaakov Hopfer and the Vad HaRabbanim, who have encouraged us every step along the way. Only with the cooperative work of families, schools, and shuls will we be able to make a difference. Last but not least, I want to thank my partners in creating this effort, Dr. Aviva Weisbord and my daughter-in-law, Mrs. Esti Ziffer. With that, it gives me great and special pleasure to introduce Rabbi Menachem Goldberger, the Rav of Congregation Tiferes Yisrael, to give us Divrei Bracha. Rabbi Goldberger has been most encouraging from the very beginning of our efforts and has personally been a strong source of support to local families experiencing addictions for over 30 years. Rabbi Goldberger.
Thank you, Larry. I would like to add one more name to Dr. Weisbord and Mrs. Esti Ziffer, and that would be Rabbi Larry Ziffer. The three of them have come together to really launch this organization, and we all know how vital it is for our community. I was asked to give Divrei Bracha, which I intend to do, but I'm going to say a few more words than Divrei Bracha as well. In 1987, it was my second year in Baltimore. I was called by a few concerned Balabatim that they took notice of some teenagers who appeared to have problems with drugs. And they wanted to try and do something about it. They asked if I would come aboard and help. I traveled to Pittsburgh to see Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky. He should be well, B'ezras Hashem. And he was running at the time the Gateway Rehabilitation Center in Pittsburgh. Foremost in his field, I had a 2-3 day intensive education in drug and alcohol rehabilitation. It shifted my attitude from that point and onward to understand addiction as a disease, which requires help, support. Musar doesn't help. Musar does not help. What helps is seeking the proper treatment for people who really are desperate for that. Now it's 30 years later, the problem is only worse, and it's much worse. In the community around us, in the United States of America, in the Jewish community, in the Frum community, addiction is becoming more and more of a problem. I told a group of young people the other day, talking on this subject, that you probably think that an alcoholic is somebody who that you see downtown sitting on the corner holding out a pan for money. Well, maybe he is, maybe he's not, maybe he's a drug addict too. But you know what? An alcoholic is a lawyer and a doctor and a rabbi and a teacher and a psychologist. An alcoholic is a man and a woman who looks just like you and me. Just like you and me. We all have to remember that we're talking about us. We're talking about ourselves. We're talking about our children. The prevalence of alcohol in Frum society has become something that we have to consider very, very seriously as adults, because we, the adults, we're the ones modeling the behavior. And all the alcohol at the simchas and the bottles and bottles of hard alcohol that disappear before your very eyes, we're modeling the behavior. Is prohibition the answer? No. Moderation, in my opinion, is the answer. But a person who has an addiction cannot indulge with the attitude of moderation. A person who has an addiction, there's only one path, and that path is abstinence, with support. The first step, we have to know ourselves. If you can go to a table and drink a l'chaim or two, and then you're done, you're fine. If that l'chaim, however, becomes 1, becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 6, becomes 10, if that beer becomes 6 beers, you're not fine. That means that there's a predilection, as Rabbi Ziffer said, toward addiction. We have to know ourselves. What kind of person am I? Can I have a l'chaim and stop easily? Or can I not? We have to know ourselves. And if the answer is that it's growing, we need support. We need help. I want to put this for a moment in spiritual terms. We have Daled Lashonos Shel Geula. We're reading about them in the Parshios this week. V'hotzeithi, v'hitzalti, v'goalti, v'lakachti. What's happening in these Daled Lashonos Shel Geula? The path of this Seforno and a few other Meforshim is as follows. The first 3 represent moving away from something evil, something destructive. The Seforno says, V'hotzeithi means there was no longer shibud. Slavery stopped. One step of redemption. V'hitzalti, that means when we left the boundaries of Mitzrayim. Second step of redemption. V'goalti is kriyas yamsuf, that our oppressors were now lying dead before us. 3 very important steps of redemption. What was the 4th? V'lokachti. V'lokachti refers to Matan Torah. What's the connection? What are we escaping from? What are we being released from in Matan Torah, like the other 3? Any redemption, any freedom of any people requires that after we are away from the destructive forces, that we then engage in the positive, meaningful forces. Yetzias Mitzrayim was leaving the evil of Mitzrayim, but becoming free people, no longer slaves, was only half the picture. The next half is, what do we do with our freedom? Matan Torah. To take something, engage in something meaningful, purposeful, holy, kadosh in life. And I think it's very similar with recovery. Part of the process is gradually moving away, step by step, from the bondage of addiction. And the other part is learning how to be involved in positive, healthy, constructive behavior in family, in community. V'lokachti, to become something. Sur meira va'asei tov. I believe that addiction is a type of slavery. Mitzrayim is Meitzar Yom, our Sforim HaKadoshim say. It's a realm of narrow places, of being constricted. Over the years, I have met and befriended many people with many addictions to alcohol, to drugs, to substances. And one thing that we see is that addiction is a very narrow, confining place, because it's all about that person's relationship with that substance, and everything else takes a back seat. Their family, their job, their life, it's just about the alcohol or the drug. What a very narrow place to live in. And each step, because redemption is a process, geula is a process, recovery is a process. Each step, you see a wider world, a broader world start to develop in a person's mind. One of the best tools, one of the pathways to refuah from addiction is community awareness and education. Because when we know and we understand and we are able to support and be there for some people and learn how to better educate our children and ourselves and how to model appropriate, healthy relationships, when we do that, that's a refuah. That's part of the healing process. When a person who has a problem with addiction knows that they are living in a community which wants them to get better and offers them the services to do so, we're moving toward refuah, we're moving toward a better place. My bracha, my tefillah for all of us who are here tonight, those of us who are unfortunately trapped within the cage of addiction, those of us who are not, all of us, we're in it together. We are a community. We are a kehillah. And my bracha is that we love each other, support each other, educate each other. And we need to take a good, strong look in the mirror at the negative behavior we are modeling and say, let's make a shift. Let's make a shift in our relationship to alcohol. Let's make a change. 10 states right now, recreational marijuana use is legal in 10 states in the United States of America. I'm sure many more will follow. The challenges in that regard are becoming more and more difficult. Nicotine addiction through vaping, juuling, is a formidable problem. Nicotine is an addictive substance. So it's all around us. We can't escape. It's not even possible if we wanted to. But what we can do is learn. See who we are, who our kids are, educate ourselves, educate our community, and support. And in that respect, I would like to thank those people who were mentioned before, Rabbi Ziffer, Dr. Weisbord, Mrs. Esther Ziffer, for really stepping up to the plate and moving this organization forward. Look at the crowd that we have tonight who has come to learn and be educated. Chayeinu means our life, and it really is about our life. May Hashem Yisborach bless us with His wisdom, His compassion, His insight, and to give to us the ability to help each other. And that may we be zoche to a geula shlema, beruchnius ubegashmius, from the small golios that we experience every day of our life, including addiction, and from the large golos that we live in every day until Mashiach comes, b'mehera v'yamein, and may we be zoche to see that day and to be part of the process of redemption. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Goldberger. And thank you, all of you, for being here tonight. It's such an encouragement. He has also served as special assistant to the university president. He's an instructor in pastoral counseling at REITs and has served as a director of psychology at North Shore University Hospital and NYU School of Medicine, where he's also a clinical professor of psychology. His PhD is from the University of Pennsylvania. He has published and lectured extensively on a wide range of topics related to education, parenting, and child mental health. On his last visit to Baltimore, he gave a wonderful presentation on raising resilient children. His areas of recognized expertise include family violence, domestic violence, stress management, transmitting values to children and adolescents, and coping with trauma and loss. And he still smiles. And this evening, he's here to speak with us. We will not have a formal open question and answer period, but at around 9 o'clock, a couple of people will be walking up and down the aisles. If you have questions you'd like to submit, please write them on the pad, hand in your paper, and then we'll try and get to as many of those questions in the last 10 or 15 minutes as we possibly can. Even if we do not get to your question, it's very valuable to us because it'll create a database for us for planning future sessions. So even if you think, well, they'll never get to my question, please write it down and submit it to us. Without any further ado, Dr. David Pelkovitz.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's just so inspiring to see what the leadership here has done, and it's what I've come to expect from Baltimore. This is one of the only communities I've seen anywhere that's able to look at a problem and take a leadership role in terms of coming up with creative and unified kind of solutions. Let me start with the story. A number of years ago, the OU came out with the ban on kiddish clubs. You all know what kiddish clubs are? Yeah. Okay. So they came out with the ban on kiddish clubs, and there was some very interesting response from the community. The head of the OU at that time, or one of the chief executives who was behind the kiddish club ban, gets a furious phone call from the president of one of the largest Orthodox shuls that's under the OU umbrella. And he starts screaming at the person behind the ban, saying, Jewish men, he said, have very little pleasure in their life. He said they work hard, they have to pay tuitions, they don't have much fun at all. There's one time a week that we're able to kind of kick back our feet and just enjoy ourselves during the Haftarah. We go and we have some scotch and we enjoy ourselves, and you're taking that away from us? What's going to be left in this religion? So we try to patiently explain why it was so important. One of the main motivations behind banning kiddish clubs is that parents are mashbiim, right? As Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal would say, mashbiya means parents aren't mechanchim, you're not educators, you're mashbiim, which means it's a ramp, the Hebrew word for ramp. It's what ramps down by what our kids see us do when we don't even know that we're shaping them. And when parents come back drunk for Musaf and the rabbi's drasha, it's not exactly the way we want to model preventing substance abuse. He hangs up the phone angrily, this shul president. 2 weeks later, this OU senior executive gets the following phone call. It's the same president. He thought he was calling to yell at him again. It wasn't. He was calling to apologize. He said, last night, I took my 15-year-old son to the Knicks game in Madison Square Garden. We went to watch the Knicks lose, okay? And I know that would get a laugh in Baltimore, right? So he's sitting with his son, and in the seats right in front of him, there are a bunch of college kids who were drinking one beer after another and just getting embarrassingly drunk. They were clearly totally over drinking. And he figures it's a teachable moment for his son. So he turns to his son and he says, Yankee, look, you see what the dangers are of drinking too much? See what fools these boys look like? And he said, his son looked at him and said, yes, Abba, that's exactly the way you and all your friends look when you come back from Kiddush Club every Shabbos. Nichnas bo ke'eres shalachna, as our rabbi says. It cut through him like a knife. And it entered into his heart. And he was a big enough man to recognize that he had to apologize. And he called up the OU executive. He apologized. He said, I'm now 100% behind making our shul dry. And to this day, that shul has not had any liquor at all in it at all. And that's not a small thing. It's actually a very important message in terms of modeling. I want to review with you a couple of core points in terms of parenting. And again, we're not here to fearmonger. We're not here to talk about it, other than to say, as we just heard so eloquently, that there are certain realities that it's important to know about. And I'm going to start with number one is the power of connection as an ultimate antidote. I know it's almost trite, but the key is kids who turn to substances in a problematic way, it's because there's often an inner emptiness. It's a complex reason, but what fills kids' neshamas, what guarantees their connection in Bein Adam La'atzmo, in their relationship to themselves, and in their spirituality, in their Bein Adam L'makom, has everything to do with what you feed them in terms of being present. A couple of years ago, I was at a Yachad Shabbaton, National Shabbaton, for families struggling with kids with various kind of physical and cognitive challenges. And there was a prominent rabbi there who had a kid who was a Yachad member. And I was speaking on this topic, and he comes over to me at the end of my talk, and he tells me the following story. He said earlier that year, his 19-year-old daughter, his Bechora, was intent on stealing the afikomen. And he was furious. She had a bunch of younger siblings. He thought she should have aged out by now. He said, it's so immature. She's going to have an edge. He says, grow up already. And she was good. You know, she knew a lot. She was already 19. And she stole the afikomen. Came time to negotiate getting the afikomen back. And he's like, angry. He says, okay, so what do you want? And she says, I'll tell you what I want. I'll tell you what I want, Tati. She says, I would like you to take me out this Wednesday night for 4 hours to a restaurant for us to sit down alone, but leave your cell phone at home. Again, it was a truth that just cut through him. He thought to himself, I'm so lucky that she still wants to have anything to do with me. But all too often, our tendency to look down instead of looking up at our kids, and our tendency to almost unconsciously, constantly prioritize this over the eye-to-eye, face-to-face, and heart-to-heart connection is something that happens without us even realizing it. I can't tell you how often I've traveled in different parts of the world and have met with kids and asked them to talk to me a little bit about what their complaints are or what they'd like to see different in their lives. And the number one complaint of many kids is that they wish that their parents would somehow figure out how to put their cell phone away and really be with them for at least a couple of hours a day. They describe their parents as complaining to them that they're always online and looking down, which feeds a lack of empathy. But the research shows that, in fact, parents are far more likely than kids to be looking down and to lack that connection. You know, we're going to read in this week's Parsha the beautiful Sforno on the first mitzvah given to us as a nation in the Torah. It's the mitzvah of HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. It's about time. I'll just read it because it's the essence of this component. Mikan be'elech yehiyu hachadashim shalochem lasos bahem kirtzonchem, the Sforno says. From now on, time is yours to use as you wish. Avol bimei hashibud, the essence of slavery, as we heard, is lo hayu yimechem shalochem. Your time is not yours. Avol hayu la'avodas acherim u'ritzonam. It was owned by our masters. The essence of freedom is how do we use our time? Lefichach rishon hu lachem l'chodshei hashana kivo hischil mitziu aschem habachiri. Your independent existence starts with that. I was just talking to the educators at a very nice meeting that we had. One of the things I was talking about is the conversational duet. That when our kids are little babies, we talk to them in a very foolish way. You ever notice when you talk to a little kid, your voice becomes high-pitched, your syntax becomes simpler. We make fools of ourselves. And as we talk to our little kids, they will do the same back to us in whatever nonsense language they have as they babble to us. That's become dead in an alarmingly high percentage of interactions in our community. And what the research shows is that when you rob your kids of that conversational duet because you're looking down at your phone and you're dividing your attention between really being there for them and using your time and your freedom that way, when you don't connect to them with undivided attention, at least some of the time, the kids end up not developing language the same way, their IQs end up lower, they end up not reaching their potential. We're squandering the most precious asset we have. We're squandering it. And we have to understand that's directly tied to the substance abuse issue, because if we don't feed the inner essence of the souls of our children and grandchildren and beyond, it's going to be very hard for them to feel the inner richness of a soul and of a sense of importance and a sense of belonging, and it becomes emptiness inside, and that's a huge risk factor. So I just like to open with that one piece. Next, I want to talk a little bit about communication, okay? Study after study shows that it's all about our ability to clearly communicate to our children in a balanced way what we expect of them and with clarity. Clarity, I was just remembering, I was talking to some people, as we just heard, vaping has become a massive problem. It's on the increase in whether you look at the percentages. It's something that didn't even exist as a problem until recently. But now there's alarmingly high numbers of kids who are vaping throughout the school day. It's often colorless and odorless, and nobody knows that they're doing it. And because of that constant delivery system of nicotine, they're becoming addicted to nicotine. Not to mention the pulmonary problems and what it does to your lungs and cancer risk. But what it does is, it's an incredibly hard addiction to get rid of. It's incredibly difficult. Our kids need to know that we know about vaping, and we need to talk to them about it. Just when I was thinking about the talk I had to give tonight, I talked to some of my grandchildren about vaping, thinking that these are my grandchildren. They're pure and above that, and none of them has ever had an impure thought in their lives. They knew what I was talking about, which is very alarming to me. But they knew, and they were able to talk to me in an intelligent way about it. But I was able to share with them what I know about how important it is, and it brought back to me a memory. When I was a kid, at bar mitzvahs, they used to serve cigarettes on the dais where the children would sit, there were glass after glass filled with cigarettes. Okay? I guess back then it wasn't as clear. This was in the early 60s. It was before the Surgeon General came out with such clarity about cancer. But what I remember is my mother repeatedly, and she was not the kind of person to be tough or to be preachy. She said, David, it would break my heart if you smoke. I don't want you to smoke. It's incredibly important that you not smoke. It means something to me. And she was emotional about it. And she repeated it a number of times. She didn't nag. And because of that, I cared what she thought. And I knew she was tuned into it, and I never smoked. I found out later I developed a significant cardiac problem when I got older, and a number of doctors told me, had I smoked, I would not be here talking to you. It was because my mother cared enough about that clarity of message, and we could do that. Kids care. The research shows that if you wake your kids up in the middle of the night and you ask them, whose opinion do you care about the most? Okay? If you wake them up, or they're probably going to be up because they're probably going to be texting their friends, with important messages like, you still up? Or you awake? But what you really need to do is make clear to your kids in a very clear way how you feel about this, because they will care about what you think. Values are transmitted by what we get emotional about and what we spend time on. And I'll just end this section, first of all, on communication. Nagging and lecturing, okay, never works, okay? You need a planned discussion. You need to strike when the iron is cold calmly. Kids develop parent deafness if you say the same thing over and over again in a critical or an angry kind of way. To be understood, first understand. Don't lecture to your kids, talk to them. Hear what they have to say, right? Aznayim, right? We hear, okay? And the word maznayim, which is the inner ear and a scale, is there's something very balancing about when we really hear our kids and don't lecture them, okay? But I'll just end this section on communication tied to this week's Parsha with a story and a thought. We learn about, at the end of this week's Parsha, we have the Parshios of Kriya Shema, which is the integration of the hand and the mind, of action and cognition, and it's all about the integration. And we read about all the Parshios of Kriya Shema at the end of the Sedra. And I just wanted to share with you a beautiful story I heard about Rav Aryeh Levin. It's Rav Aryeh Levin, famous Rav in Yerushalayim, Rav Hasirim. So he had a way of connecting to everybody. He had a heart as big as gold. And I heard this story from his son, that he was once walking down the streets of his neighborhood in Yerushalayim. And there was a very tall boy from his block who used to be a frum kid who left and developed some problems, maybe with substances. He went off the derech. He left our way of life. Very big, tall kid, but he was embarrassed. When he'd see Rav Levin walking on the streets of Yerushalayim, he'd run away. And one day, even though Rav Levin was a very short guy, and this was a very tall adolescent, Rav Levin catches up to him. And he says, Chaim, wait, I want to talk to you. Chaim was embarrassed. He stopped. And Rav Levin says, what are you running away from? I haven't seen you. I've missed you so much. Just wanted to talk to you and see how you're doing. So Chaim answers, Rebbe, I'm just so embarrassed. I'm not even wearing a yarmulke. And Rav Levin, who's looking right at his chest, says, let me tell you something, Chaim. He says, from where I'm standing, all I can see is your heart. All I can see is your heart. And that's the core of this message, the message of communication. We communicate by speaking to our children's hearts. We communicate by having clarity about what we expect and what we get emotional about. And bottom line here is make your position clear, okay? Don't assume your children know where you stand. They want you to talk to them. I hear that from kids all the time. Kids nowadays are looking for hadracha. You may think they're not, they are. Even though they may act like they want you out of their life. What's the name of that best-selling book about adolescence? Mom, would you get out of my life, but first would you take me and Cheryl to the mall? Okay? But in terms of clarity, you need to teach them very clearly refusal skills. You have to help them develop ways of saying no. You bring voice to values by giving them active kinds of strategies for dealing with all of this, right? You ask them what they would do or say in risky situations. Then you can give them examples. There's no one script here, okay? But it could be, you could prepare them. You could say that they could answer, I like you, but I don't like drugs. I know this sounds like totally like an old man talking, because it is, okay? I get kicked off the team if I was caught around drugs. It makes me uncomfortable to be around drugs. My dad or mom or grandmother would kill me if they knew I was doing this. No thanks. It's not. Sometimes the best thing is just no without an explanation. No, it's not for me. No, just a simple no. Sometimes that's what matters, okay? But the bottom line is, you just teach your kids that it's fine to say no, and that I usually find they're not going to get big-time pressure from kids. Even though there is peer pressure, and it's very hard when you're in adolescence, there's a tremendous need of adolescents to feel accepted. But basically, your love and your connecting to their heart and your clarity, ahava mekalkelas hashura, love breaks the straight line. Okay, we're good with that? Okay. And then there are teachable moments, okay? You find it all comes from spending time with your kids. Next, let's talk a little bit about the importance of monitoring without smothering. Here's a clear statistics. Lack of supervision of your child triples risk. I'll say it again. Lack of proper supervision triples risk. The vast majority of parents of adolescents in the community, in the general secular community, okay, the research shows, insist on knowing when their kids go out, who are you going out with? What are you doing? When are you going to be home? That's normative. Even though our kids insist that you're the only one who has those questions. They always say, my friends never have to do that. I've yet to meet that friend. I've spoken in Australia and in South Africa and in Zurich and in different parts of this country, and I always ask people, do you know the friend? Is the friend here? I have not met the friend. Okay? So the right questions to ask your kids when they go out is who, what, when, and where is totally essential. Know your teen's friends and collaborate with their parents in banding together, not in an angry way, in a collaborative way, as a community, as we were just hearing so beautifully. You know, there's a wonderful program that I was somewhat involved in starting, but it was really started by Michal Clara Zakheim. It's called MUST. So 2 summers ago, at a get-together in the Catskills, there was a large get-together of mothers, mostly from Flatbush, who spend the summer in some bungalow colony. I was asked to speak to them in that situation on digital challenges. And Michal got up. This is Fegi Zakheim's daughter, and this is a wonderful woman and wonderful activist. And she said she wanted to start a program. It was very simple. She asked every mother there, large number of mothers, what age do your kids start using smartphones? Turned out in that community, 5th grade. She said, fine, we're going to start a WhatsApp group. I want every mother here to commit to contacting every mother of every 5th grade in the schools that your kids are going to be going to, and just ask her a simple thing, that as a community, all the mothers are going to agree to stall their kids getting a smartphone. Instead of 5th grade, let's reevaluate next year in 6th grade. There was a tremendously large number of classes in different parts of the world, actually, but certainly in Brooklyn, where the mothers did it, and there was no peer pressure, because all the mothers banded together. It's the kihila. It's the banding together. It's the root system, which is the key to the connection, which is our answer to the alienation and the disconnectedness that fuels substance abuse. And in these neighborhoods, there was no peer pressure. Not a single kid had a smartphone. This past summer, we got together with the same group of women. We said, are you up for trying another year? Everybody signed up. So now we're stalling it until after the kids are out of 6th grade. And we're hoping we could keep it going till the kids are middle-aged. And that's what we're hoping for, you know? So, but that's an example, okay? I think that whatever it is that leads to the difficulty in monitoring or any of the difficulties that we're talking about here, it's so hard to do it alone. But when you have the connection and you have that underground root system, it's an unbelievable kind of gift. And I'll just, I think I'm going to start to think about, you're supposed to be gathering questions or something about now. So let me just go to a couple of side but important thoughts. A drop about Fortnite. I know you're going to have a night, but I was asked to address it a little bit. Anybody here want me to talk about Fortnite? Anybody here have no idea what Fortnite is? Wonderful, okay. But it's only about 10% have no idea what Fortnite is. If you're lucky enough to not know what Fortnite is, wonderful, okay. But Fortnite is a first-person shooter game. Let me talk to you about it just briefly, about the research on it and what some of the problems are and why it's important to know, because these are sources of disconnect, and any source of disconnect, and this is an addictive game. Let me start with the quick vignette. Shabbos before last, I was a scholar in residence at the OU West Coast Conference, and I was speaking in a shul in a very wealthy neighborhood of Beverly Hills. And they arranged for us to take over a restaurant for the talk I was giving. It was very nice and a lot of very interesting, some very famous people who were there. And I'm sitting at the table with the guy and I'm talking to him, and he said, you know, I just moved from Silicon Valley. And he's a guy, a Yeshiva University graduate, a brilliant guy. He's a game theory specialist. I found out later that he's one of the top people at Facebook. He had spent the last 10 years living in Silicon Valley. He says, let me tell you about Silicon Valley. In Silicon Valley, there is absolutely nobody in Silicon Valley lets their kids anywhere near screens. They're not allowed to have smartphones. They're not allowed to have computers. They just don't go near screens. Nobody has that here. Why? Because he said, talking about himself, and all of the other people in the senior leadership of Facebook, we know and have been working on how to hook your kids and how to hook you in terms of making money. So he says we get those little squirts, okay, those little squirts of the brain chemicals that lead to addiction. And we have everything designed that way. He said you absolutely don't want your kid near those things because they're addictive. And in fact, the research on Fortnite shows that about 20 to 30% of kids have cut school to play Fortnite, but more shockingly, about 25% of adults have missed work to play Fortnite. It's those little dopamine squirts that keep us going there. Okay, fine. So that's not the end of the world. So you miss a couple of days of work, you get addicted to it. You know, an addiction isn't an addiction unless it's severe and persistent and interfering with functioning and pervasive. But here's where I have some real problems with Fortnite. Number one is the problem of Hergel. okay? Meaning we get habituated. We get habituated. And what that means is, what you have to do in Fortnite is you're playing with 100 people. The one who wins Fortnite has killed 99 of those 100 people. You shoot them and kill them, and then you won. Now, so you say, so big deal, don't be such an old man. What's that about? But the answer to why it's a big deal is habituation matters. In World War II, 1 out of 4 men couldn't kill the first time they were in combat. They had to have special programs to teach these men how to kill. Come the Vietnamese War, they're ready with the same program. They canceled it immediately. What was different about the Vietnamese War? Why were men able to kill the first time they were in combat? Because it was the first generation raised on TV, and that makes it easier to kill. Makes it easier to kill. When our kids see that, it gets at their neshama. We know, though, that where it becomes really problematic is one of the main risk factors for addiction is sexual abuse. It's something that is a truism that we see over and over and over again. When you feel damaged and broken, you often turn to substances, and it's unfortunately a problem that we're not immune to. What's been happening with Fortnite is 2-3 months ago in New Jersey, there was a sting operation where they discovered that Fortnite has a voice function. So all the 100 people you're playing with can talk to you. And what better place for pedophiles to go to? Turns out it's so common for pedophiles to seduce boys and girls playing Fortnite that the National Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Children has put out an advisory around the world: don't let your kids play Fortnite. You can't disable that function. And a couple of months ago in New Jersey, there were a number of arrests of men who the FBI set up a sting operation for, who thought they were meeting these boys to seduce them after playing Fortnite with them and talking to them. Among the men who were arrested were 3 men from Lakewood, okay? Now, I'm not saying this to shock you or to frighten you or to fearmonger. We have to know. And that's true of a lot of first-person shooter games. We have to talk to our kids. Am I saying that your kids are in danger this way? No. But I'm more worried about the steady impact on our kids' neshamas as a risk factor. That's the thing on Fortnite. People ask me to speak a little bit about ADHD medication and abuse. Let me talk about that just briefly, because it's a little complicated in terms of addiction, okay? The problem is, very often, we're having a pediatrician, or it could be any physician, very quickly will diagnose the kid as having an ADHD, including 4-, 5-, and 6-year-old kids. And they don't do a full professional evaluation that really takes time to do properly. That has to be done by real professionals who are experts in the area, okay? In order to have a real diagnosis of ADHD, the symptoms have to be severe, persistent, pervasive, and interfere with functioning in at least 2 spheres of functioning. Very often, the diagnosis is made without that cut. And as a result, we have that kind of medication that kids are put on, and it is possible to abuse stimulant medication. On the other hand, properly prescribed stimulant medication for kids with attention deficit could be life-saving. The research shows that it puts you at lower risk for substance abuse long-term. So I know I'm doing this very briefly and very quickly, but it's something to think about, okay? Next. I wanted to end with a story, okay? I think I did. Consequences, okay? If you decide to monitor more carefully, which I think is the key, and know where your kids are, and what happens if they ignore you, remember the 4 characteristics of effective consequences. Effective consequences are unemotional, logical, and brief, okay? And have the adolescent's input, okay? You want to hear where your kid is coming from. You need to be unemotional, logical, and brief. That's when your kids are most likely to internalize your values. So you need the clarity, and you need to think about the consequences in that way if you have to have consequences. Very often, if it makes sense to your kid why you're being stricter and why you're worried about them, and you have clarity, that might be the key. But the key is all about connection. Let me end with a story. Have I told this group the homeless story? The homeless conference? Probably not, right? Anybody hear the homeless conference story? No, good, okay. So I must not have said it in Baltimore, or if I did, nobody was listening, which is even more likely. Okay, and with this I'll end, because I think it's the take-home message before we get to discussion. Here we go. Number of years ago, I'm invited to give a talk at a homeless conference somewhere in Manhattan. I was very excited. I thought, what could be nicer than going and hanging out with a bunch of homeless people and talking to them? And I don't know why I thought that's what it would be. It's not what it was. It was in the Waldorf Astoria back then, in their ballroom. It was 400 very well-dressed men and women who were executives in the homeless field. And I go, and there are two speakers. I'm on a big dais. So there's me, and there's a guy who was one of the most unbelievably impressive bios that I've ever seen. Here's what it starts with. It says, Dr. So-and-so is in charge of homeless policy for the United States government. He has a bachelor's from Harvard, a PhD from Harvard. Last year, he won an Oscar for a documentary he made on homelessness. And that's just the beginning. It goes on and on and on. He's a very good-looking guy wearing an incredibly expensive suit. And I'm this Zhlubby Tarvadas guy up there, thinking I'm so out of my league, but fine, I figure I'll be the comic relief. He gets up to speak first. And he gets up to speak, and his opening line was so unbelievable that you almost saw 400 people collectively fall off their chairs. Here was his opening line. He said, when I was 11 years old, my father, in a coked-up rage, in front of me, killed my mother and then put the gun on himself. So I was orphaned. I saw it all. He said, I looked older than my age. I was an only child. I did not believe in the foster care system being able to do me justice, and I immediately ran away. He said, I spent the next 2 years having a meaningless, horrifying life. I was lonely, I was frightened, I was scared, I was traumatized. And I went from homeless shelter to homeless shelter. The second I thought they were on to me, I'd run away again. And I crisscrossed around the country until 2 years into the process, I heard 4 words that forever changed my life and is the reason I'm here. 400 pens come out. Everybody takes out a sheet of paper. He says, put your pens away. He says, because it's not the words, it's how they were spoken. He said, I came into a shelter, and the director of the shelter in Midtown Manhattan, he looks at me. He really looks at me. And he puts his arm around me, and he says, how are you doing? And he meant it. He really wanted to know. How are you doing? I saw it. I saw it. Our hearts bounced off each other. I saw it. And I started telling him. The more I told him, the more I was opening the spigots of talking about everything that had happened to me. And he encouraged me. And we met 1 hour, 2 hours a day with my pouring my heart out to him for about 2 months. After a couple of months of this, he saw that I'm a pretty bright guy. And he gets me a full scholarship to the Dalton School. And from there, I get a full scholarship to Harvard undergraduate and then doctoral program. And I'm here. He said it would not have happened without those 4 words. And that's the lesson I want to leave you with. We all want to leave you with in terms of what's the ultimate way of protecting our kids. So sure, we need the clarity, and sure, we need to tell them very clearly in a good way of communicating what we want from them, and we need the rules, and we need the balance between love and limits, and we need to educate ourselves, and we need to be there, but ultimately, it's about constantly asking our children in a way that we're looking at them, kamayim apanim alpanim, and asking them, how are you doing? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Pelkovitz. We do have some questions. I wish we had another hour because there are enough good questions here. We do have to get Dr. Pelkovitz back on the last train out of Baltimore to go back to New York tonight, and he didn't bring pajamas. So we do have to do this. A couple, maybe quick questions and quick answers. Are we talking mostly about boys, or is this an issue for girls as well?
Right, so it's an excellent question. I'm going to answer it in terms of how I know it, and it's very important to look at it. In terms of the experience of the people here who are substance abuse professionals, are you seeing an increase in the number of girls in your work? It's both. We see both. In general, when it comes to substance abuse, or those kind of behaviors, gender is not as much of an issue. In general, there's a different pattern of pain in boys and girls. Girls tend to turn pain on themselves, but once a girl crosses the barrier, okay, even though in general with these kind of problems, boys are at greater risk, once a girl hits that point, the road back for her is much tougher. It's harder for a girl to find a place for herself. There are many more treatment programs. There are many more sources of help for boys and for girls. It's been a real problem, and we see it all the time. Unfortunately, some of the really tragic opioid-related overdoses have been young women, and it's a horrible tragedy. And I'm not up on the latest statistics. That's why I punted the question. But I'm sure there are people here who are. Let me just quickly see if I have it down here. I just want to, while I say that, I'm going to just say one thing that I didn't say. How do you identify a potential problem? I'm just going to quickly do that. I imagine it's one of the questions, so I'm going to go to it now. Okay? Number one, the presentation of an addict. And this is when our kids go to real addiction. Let's say be it with any of the areas that we've been talking about. There's a tendency to be defensive, a tendency to lie and lose sight of reality, trying to become very sensitive, to have a fragile ego, sometimes to become aggressive, manipulative, frightened, and assuming the worst. And that's just a general kind of pattern. But how do you identify a potential problem? And the answer is, it's not as simple as a simple list. Some drugs make your eyes red, but we have Visine for that, okay? There is a truism. All addictions present differently. I was telling the educators that the head of National Institute for Drug Abuse Prevention talks about 80 pathways to addiction. It's much more, in terms of identifying a potential problem, about a change of behavior than the behavior itself. So you have to really know your kid for that, okay? And we need to set up systems that guarantee that each student is known enough to identify a change, okay? Some people believe that random drug testing is not a bad idea. Surprisingly, if I'd meet with a group this large of adolescents and I'd ask them, how many of you would like to have random drug testing? Most say they would, because they see it. First of all, they're looking for hadracha, and maybe more importantly, they're looking for a way to be able sort of control themselves. And they actually like the idea of random drug testing, which I know is a surprising finding. It's not clear how well it really works, but it's not a bad idea, and many schools have been doing it.
I know when we met with the folks from Amudim in New York, they told us that just a few years ago it was probably about 80% boys and 20% girls, and today they see closer to 50-50. So that tells us something, even if we don't know about the incidents, but in terms of the cases that are coming forward. A lot of questions, Dr. Pelkovitz, about what to do at the Shabbos table. Is it okay to have wine at the Shabbos table? Is it okay for the parents to drink wine at the Shabbos table, and what should they do? Tell their children?
Okay, I hope I don't get killed for this, but I am from out of town, and I'm about to take the train back, so don't chase me, okay? Here's my understanding of this. I shared with educators this. When I was a kid, my father, Zal, used to, with every Kiddush on Shabbos, on Friday night and on Shabbos, and especially after we had fish, he'd share with me and my brother and my sisters a little shot of scotch, okay? Chivas Regal. They still make Chivas Regal? It was before the age, okay? Little shot of scotch. There was nothing forbidden about it. It was just part of modeling responsible drinking. I never saw him drunk. I never even saw him moderately high. And it spoke to me as something that just made it into not forbidden fruit. Here's my understanding of the research. I don't know if this is still true. I think it probably is. 2 countries that model responsible drinking for kids. Southern Italy, where there's a bottle of wine with dinner every night, and adolescents are allowed to drink that wine, and France, okay? So they model responsible drinking around the dinner table. Those 2 areas that have that have the lowest adolescent alcoholism rate in the world, okay? So it says something about that, but that's true in a different era. I have a feeling that we need more Gedarim. I have a feeling that we have to be careful about that because it's a much more complicated world, and it's much easier for kids to be able to get at alcohol. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to make sure that shuls and caterers not allow kids, as we were hearing before and as you started with, to get easy access. We have to really monitor it, and we have to monitor our own liquor closets because it's a different world. And I'm not so sure, so I'm a little hesitant to say what I just said, okay? The week after the OU ban came out against Kiddush clubs, the New York Times quoted me in an article about Kiddush clubs, a pretty prominent article that talked about all the leaders that did it together. They quoted me as saying that I'm not so sure that the answer isn't to model responsible drinking. And I became really teased by every rabbi I knew around the world for being a pro-drinking guy. But I was the hero of every Kiddush club in the world. So, anyway, yeah. I don't like Kiddush clubs, by the way. Yeah.
You mentioned that success would come if we have real good cooperation between parents and schools. What can we as parents expect of the schools, and what can the schools expect of us as parents?
I was hoping you wouldn't ask that question. Okay. I think that's the key question. The key question is that the ultimate answer is a partnership. And we're living at a time that in the balance between love and limits, parents are much more comfortable with the love part of parenting and have a harder time with the limits I've been talking about, and with the clarity I've been talking about, and with facing the frustration of our kids. So we turn to the schools to do it, but it can't be just from the schools. It really has to be a partnership. We need engagement, and it needs to be together. It needs to be, again, with the underground root systems intertwined. Otherwise, it just can't work. It just can't work. We have to figure out a way to get parents out of the concern about getting our kids upset. It's fine for our kids to be upset. It's fine. I often quote a pasuk from Mishlei and a related medrash. The pasuk of Mishlei says, Yaser bincha ki yesh tikva vel hamiso al titei nafshecha. Put limits on your kids, there's always hope, and don't pay attention to their yelling, screaming, and crying. And the medrash says, Kol hamosif av yisurin al beno. The more a parent puts limits on his child, Mosif haben ahava al aviv. And I see that all the time. The more that child will love the parent. I see it. Our kids are looking for it. And our kids need that kind of toughness. And I think the schools could teach us that. I think we need to just get more comfortable with the idea that ein adam omed al divrei Torah elam kein nichshol behem. We don't master internalizing our values without facing obstacles and difficulties and frustration. That's the way we grow. That's the way we grow. And parents, I find, are becoming more and more aware of the need for that. The old days where our kids could just go on autopilot and turn out okay are no longer there. We have to take a more active role, and I think we have to figure out, I think that's one of the real challenges, but real promises of Chayeinu.
If despite our best efforts, we've done everything right, and nevertheless our child comes home from a party, from a simcha, drunk or stoned, or we find some drug paraphernalia hidden away somewhere in the house, what do we do next?
Yeah. So if we get that kind of behavior, number one is don't ask your child, "Are you drunk?" Don't ask your child don't ask why questions. Why did you do this? Don't yell, don't scream, don't criticize. You're not going to get anywhere, and it's going to be totally counterproductive. What you could say instead to yourself, the mantra you say to yourself, is I have no control over their behavior right now. Long term, I have control over the consequences. And you strike when the iron is cold. You say to them, look, I know you're not in a position now to hear me, but this is something that I take very seriously, and I very much want to see to it that you stay safe, and I want us to make up a time that we could sit down and talk. And preferably to set up a time very soon, but not that day, and not when they're hungover the next morning. But you set up a time for a planned discussion. They can't be frightened that you're going to kill them, because that'll shut them down and they'll go out and maybe drink even more or do whatever they shouldn't be doing even more. What you need to do is you have a quiet discussion with them and you hear out what it's about, see if they can come up with a plan on what they're willing to do or what they can do. Find out if they have a problem. Maybe they don't. Maybe they were just experimenting. I'm going to share with you a fascinating and important study. They found when they looked at three groups of kids who never experimented with getting high or drunk even once, kids who drank a lot or got high a lot, okay? And kids who just once or twice tested the limits by getting drunk. And they looked at the long-term outcomes of those three groups. The group that did a little bit of experimenting did best in life later on. I'm not recommending that. I'm not recommending that at all. What I'm saying, though, is sometimes kids need to define themselves by testing the limits a little bit. So if you overreact and you cut your connection with them, you're putting them at much greater risk. If instead you try to find out what's going on, if you feel this is a repetitive thing, and they're not accepting whatever new limits you put on them in terms of the three ways of approaching consequences I talked about, then it's time to go to a professional to get a consultation. You can't do this alone, and sometimes there's very effective help out there. And there's a lot of wonderful community resources that are out there. And the schools in this neighborhood are amazing. I've been so impressed with the level of the emotional support system of the school mental health professionals here. It's amazing. But bottom line is, the key is calmness and striking when the iron is cold, and to be understood, first understand.
Thank you. This next, and I think last question. relates to an experience I had on Sunday. I was driving up to Philadelphia, and I saw 2 billboards. The first one said, "Drugs kill," and it had a picture of a bottle of liquor and a pile of pills and a syringe and an e-cigarette. And then a few miles down the line, there was a full billboard that said, "Juul is cool," and it had a picture of a Juul. And I think there's still confusion in this room based on some of these questions. What is a Juul? What is so bad about it? Isn't it a better alternative than cigarettes? Can you give us a little bit of a sense of that?
Right, so Juul, there's a big difference between Juul as a device to help people who are addicted to smoking and adults who have that. That's what I think is confusing people. Juul for kids have given up smoking. Smoking is no longer, for the most part, a big problem. Juul, though, is an enormously problematic issue. In a very short time, as I said before, kids become addicted. I shared with the educators the story of a well-known child psychiatrist who I worked closely with in the hospital I was at for many years. And she had given up smoking 40 years ago. And she told me that she has to take the long way out of the hospital whenever she leaves the hospital, because if she walks by the section of the outside of the hospital where smokers go to smoke, away from everybody else, and she just gets a whiff of a cigarette 40 years later, it's been 40 years since she smoked a cigarette, it takes every bit of her self-control not to run home and light up a pack of cigarettes. That's how addictive nicotine is. That's what our kids are reporting, as many as 40%. I mean, it's a huge number, and it's so easy to get away with it. It's so easy to hide it. They now make special clothing that allows you to vape without anybody knowing and constantly get that hit. And it's great for kids because it may help them with their anxiety, and it may help them calm down, and it may help them lose weight, and all those kind of things. But it's unfortunately giving them a lifelong risk for addiction to nicotine, so they'll have to do what this child psychiatrist does, and so that they'll have to also face some of the really scary pulmonary impact. Juuls is not the same thing for kids as it is for adults. Okay?
I want to thank Dr. Pelkovitz. I want to thank all of you. I want to just add, I thanked at the beginning Mr. and Mrs. Aaron Blackman for their support. Their support was in memory of David Gutman and in honor of the Gutman family, who provided the kind of support that they did to David when he was dealing with a difficult situation. And I think that should be an inspiration for all of us to provide support, provide care for the people that need it in our community. We hope to move forward with more programming like this, and please watch your email, watch Facebook, or wherever it is you get your information.
Is the